I got the job at WKRL because nobody else wanted it. That's the honest version. The romantic version is that I'd always loved radio, that I grew up listening to late-night broadcasts in my childhood bedroom with the volume turned low so my parents wouldn't hear, that I'd studied communications and dreamed of being behind the microphone. Some of that is true, but the real reason I applied for an overnight position at a low-power FM station in Harwick, Pennsylvania, was that I'd been laid off from my data entry job in March. My unemployment was about to run out, and the listing on Indeed said, "No experience necessary." The station was small, community licensed. It operated out of a single-story cinder block building on Route 19, about 2 miles past the last strip mall before the road turned rural. The building had been a veterinary clinic in the 80s, then a State Farm office, then nothing for a long time. You could still see the faded outline where the old signage had been. WKRL shared the parking lot with a self-storage facility on one side and an auto glass repair place on the other, both of which closed at 5. My shift was midnight to 6 a.m. The job itself was simple. I monitored the automation system, made sure the pre-recorded programs played in sequence, read the station ID at the top of each hour, and handled any technical issues. Most nights there were no technical issues. The transmitter was only 100 watts. Our coverage area was maybe a 15-mile radius, mostly dead farmland and the southern edge of Harwick proper. I don't think more than 40 people listened to us at any given time, and I suspect most of them were insomniacs or long-haul truckers passing through on 19. The building had 3 rooms. The front office, which had a desk nobody used and a filing cabinet full of old program logs. The broadcast booth, which was a converted exam room with acoustic foam stapled to the walls, a mixing board from maybe 2004, 2 condenser microphones, and a desktop computer running the automation software. And the back room, which was storage broken equipment, boxes of promotional CDs that were never sent out, a mini fridge that hummed too loud, and a folding cot that the previous overnight guy had apparently slept on during his shifts. His name was Dennis. The station manager, a guy named Carl Oberlin, told me Dennis had left for personal reasons about 3 weeks before I started. Carl ran the station during the day, along with 2 part-time volunteers who handled the afternoon programming. Carl was in his 60s, had a gray mustache and a gut, wore the same khaki vest most days, and spoke to me like I was slightly beneath his notice, which was fair. I was beneath most people's notice at that point. My first week was uneventful. Carl trained me on a Monday afternoon, showed me how the automation software worked, where the transmitter controls were, how to log my hours. He gave me a key to the building, told me to keep the front door locked during my shift, and said I could eat whatever was in the mini fridge as long as I replaced it. Then he left, and that night I drove back at 11:45, let myself in, and began my first overnight. The routine established itself quickly. I'd arrive around 11:50, unlock the front door, turn on the booth lights, check the automation queue for the next 6 hours, log in to the station's ancient desktop, and settle into the swivel chair with a thermos of coffee and whatever podcast I was listening to on my earbuds, one earbud in, one out, so I could hear if anything went wrong with the broadcast. The automation system played a mix of syndicated programming, mostly talk radio, some old jazz blocks, a few pre-recorded local shows that volunteers had taped during the week. My only live responsibility was the station ID, which I read at midnight, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 a.m. You're listening to WKRL, Harwick, Pennsylvania, community radio for the greater Harwick area. Then I'd hit the button to resume automation. 20 seconds of work per hour. The rest of the time I just sat there. It was boring. It was fine. I needed boring and fine. The building was quiet at night, aside from the hum of the equipment and the occasional sound of a truck passing on Route 19. The acoustic foam dampened everything. Sometimes I'd hear the mini fridge cycle on in the back room or the heating system click. In January, which is when I started, the building was drafty. There was a space heater under the mixing board that I kept pointed at my legs. I want to be clear about something. I am not someone who scares easily. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts. I've never had a paranormal experience, never seen anything I couldn't explain. I'm 34 years old, I have a degree in business administration, I worked in data processing for 6 years before this, and the most interesting thing about me is probably that I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 3 minutes. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe was not the product of an overactive imagination. I'd been working at the station for about 2.5 weeks when the first thing happened. It was a Thursday night, technically Friday morning, around 2:15 a.m. I'd just read the 2 o'clock station ID and was back in my chair, half listening to the broadcast through the monitor speaker, half reading something on my phone. The program playing was a syndicated block called Night Sounds Ambient Jazz, very mellow, the kind of thing that's designed to be background noise for people who can't sleep. I noticed the music had stopped. Not abruptly it faded, the way it was supposed to at the end of a track, but nothing followed. I looked up at the monitor and saw the automation software was still running. The progress bar still moving, but the audio output was showing silence. Dead air. I checked the queue and saw the next track was loaded but hadn't triggered. I clicked it manually. Nothing happened for about 2 seconds. Then the music resumed mid-track, as if it had been playing the whole time and I'd just unmuted it. I made a note in the log, 2:17 a.m., brief dead air, automation glitch, resolved manually, and didn't think much of it. Equipment that old has hiccups. Carl had warned me about that during training. The following Tuesday it happened again. Same time block, roughly. Around 2:20 a.m., the audio dropped to silence. The software showed playback continuing, but nothing was coming through the monitors or presumably through the transmitter. This time I waited a few seconds before intervening, just watching the meters. The VU meters on the mixing board were flat. Complete silence on the output. But the software insisted it was playing audio. I restarted the track manually, made another log note, and moved on. The third time was the following Thursday. Same window between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. This time I was paying closer attention because I'd started to expect it. And this time, when the audio dropped out, I noticed something I hadn't before. The VU meters weren't completely flat. There was a tiny amount of signal, barely a flicker on the needle, maybe negative 40 decibels, which is essentially nothing. Background noise floor. But it was moving. Not randomly either. It had a rhythm to it. A very faint, very slow pulse. I leaned closer to the monitor speaker and turned up the volume. At first I couldn't hear anything. Then, very quietly, so quiet I wasn't sure it was real, I heard what sounded like breathing. Slow, even breathing. Not labored, not creepy, just the sound of someone breathing steadily, close to a microphone. I pulled back and checked the booth. Both microphones in the room were switched off, their channels on the mixing board were down. There was no reason any live audio should be reaching the output. I was alone in the building. I checked the software to see if some file was playing that contained recorded silence with ambient noise, but the file in the queue was a jazz track, saxophone, piano, bass. Not breathing. I restarted the track. The jazz resumed. The breathing was gone. I put it in the log as another automation glitch and drove home at 6 that morning feeling slightly unsettled, though I couldn't have articulated exactly why. Over the next week, I began paying more attention to the equipment. I ran a diagnostic on the automation software, checked the audio routing, inspected the cable connections on the mixing board. Everything seemed fine. Carl came in one morning while I was still there. We overlapped by about 20 minutes and I mentioned the dead air issues. He said the computer needed replacing and he'd been trying to get a grant to buy a new one for 2 years. He didn't seem concerned. I asked him about Dennis, the previous overnight guy. Just casually, had he mentioned any issues with the equipment? Carl got a slightly annoyed look. Dennis had his own issues, he said. Nothing to do with the board. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push it. The breathing happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always in that same window between 2 and 2:30 a.m. Always during a moment of dead air that the software didn't acknowledge. And each time, the signal on the VU meters was slightly stronger. Not by much. Maybe negative 35 decibels instead of 40. Still nearly inaudible if you weren't specifically listening for it. But present, consistent. I started recording it. I brought in a portable digital recorder, a little Zoom H1 I'd bought years ago for a podcast project that never materialized, and plugged it into the output bus of the mixing board. If whatever was happening was passing through the signal chain, the recorder would catch it. On a Wednesday night around 2:20, the dead air hit again. I let it run. I watched the recorder's level meters and saw the same tiny, rhythmic flicker. I let it record for about 90 seconds, then manually restarted the programming. When I played the recording back on headphones, I heard the breathing clearly. It was unmistakably human. Steady, calm, close to the microphone. But underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, there was something else. Not a word exactly. More like the shape of a word, the mouth movements of someone forming syllables without fully voicing them. Subvocal. Like someone about to speak but not quite committing to it. I listened to that recording 4 times on my drive home. I couldn't make out what was being said, if anything was being said at all. It might have been nothing. It might have been pareidolia my brain trying to find meaning in ambient noise. But I didn't think so. I want to explain something about late-night radio that most people don't think about. When you're on the air at 2 in the morning, you're speaking into what feels like an infinite void. You have no idea who's listening. There's no feedback, no chat room, no caller most nights. You say your station ID into the microphone and the words go out through the transmitter and scatter into the dark, and you have no idea where they land or who receives them. It's like throwing a message into the ocean, except the ocean is silence and distance and sleeping houses and empty roads. After a few weeks of doing this, you start to develop a strange awareness of the transmission itself, the signal going out, the carrier wave, the idea that your voice is physically present in the air around the building, around the town, hitting antennas and passing through walls. I started wondering, if something can go out, can something come in? I don't mean that supernaturally. I mean technically. A mixing board takes inputs and routes them to outputs. If something was introducing audio into the signal chain, it had to be entering through one of the inputs. But I'd checked them all. The microphone channels were off. The auxiliary inputs were empty. The computer was the only active source, and the computer was playing jazz tracks that didn't contain breathing, unless it wasn't coming through the board at all. I started checking the transmitter. The transmitter was in a small closet off the broadcast booth, a metal rack unit with a few LED indicators, connected to the antenna on the roof by a coaxial cable. I didn't fully understand the transmitter's electronics, but I knew the basics. Audio goes in, RF signal goes out. If there was interference on the output, it should show up on the transmitter's meters. I started watching those meters more carefully during the dead air events. And one night in early February, I think it was the 6th, I noticed something. During the dead air period, the transmitter's forward power meter, which normally sat at around 95 watts during broadcast, didn't drop. It should have. If the audio input goes silent, the carrier wave still transmits, but the modulation drops and you'll see a slight decrease in the reflected signal pattern. But the meter was holding steady. as if something was still being modulated onto the carrier, as if the transmitter was still broadcasting something, even though nothing was being fed into it from the board. I called Carl the next morning and asked if the transmitter had ever picked up interference from nearby sources. He said it was possible we were near Route 19 and CB radio bleed wasn't unheard of, but he'd never had complaints about it. I asked if anyone had ever reported hearing strange things on our frequency. He paused for a long time, then said, "What kind of strange things?" I told him I was probably just hearing RF interference. He said probably. Then he said, "If you want to swap shifts, I can put you on afternoons." I said no, I didn't want afternoons. I told myself it was because the overnight differential was an extra $1.50 an hour, and I needed the money. That was partly true. By mid-February, I had 11 recordings of the breathing, each one slightly longer than the last, because I was letting the dead air run further before intervening. The most recent was almost 4 minutes. I'd sit in the booth with my headphones on, the monitor speaker muted, listening through the Zoom recorder in real time, and I'd hear it, that steady, patient breathing, and beneath it, that subvocal murmuring that I still couldn't resolve into words. The 12th recording was different. It was February 19th, a Wednesday. The dead air began at 2:14 a.m. I let it run as usual, recording from the output bus. The breathing was there, as expected. Slightly louder, maybe negative 25 decibels now, clearly audible without having to strain. And the subvocal murmuring was more defined. Still not words I could identify, but the cadence was changing. It sounded less like someone about to speak and more like someone in the middle of speaking a conversation I was only hearing one side of, and that side was turned almost all the way down. Then, at the 3:22 mark of the recording, the breathing stopped. Silence. Complete flat silence for about 8 seconds. Then a voice said my name. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just my name, Owen, spoken in a tone that was calm, clear, and completely neutral. The way you'd say someone's name to get their attention. The way you'd say it if you were sitting across from them and wanted them to look up. I stopped the recording. I sat there in the booth for probably a full minute without moving. The automation software was still showing dead air. The VU meters were flat. The transmitter hummed in its closet. Route 19 was silent outside. I restarted the programming and the jazz resumed as if nothing had happened. When I played the recording back, my name was there, clear as anything. Owen. In a voice I didn't recognize, not male, not female, not old, not young. Just a voice. Like a voice with all the identifying characteristics removed. A voice that was only a voice. I didn't tell Carl about this. I'm not sure why. Part of it was that I knew how it sounded. Part of it was that I wasn't sure the recording would mean anything to someone else. They didn't know my name. It could be any word. It could be interference shaped like a word. But mostly, I think, it was that telling someone would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Instead, I did something that, looking back, I can't fully explain. I started staying past the end of my shift. My shift ended at 6 a.m. The automation continued running after I left. The morning programming was fully pre-scheduled, and Carl usually arrived around 8:30 to handle whatever needed handling during business hours. So there was a 2.5-hour window where the station was unattended, just running on autopilot. On February 20th, the night after I heard my name, I didn't leave at 6. I just stayed in the chair. I told myself I was waiting to see if the anomaly happened again outside its usual window. But really, I think I just didn't want to leave the booth. I didn't want to be in my apartment, lying awake, thinking about a voice on a dead signal that knew my name. So I stayed. I read the 6 a.m. station ID as usual, then just sat there as the morning programming played. Farm reports, local community calendar, a pre-recorded show about gardening that one of the volunteers had taped on Sunday. At 6:40, the dead air happened again. This had never occurred outside the 2.002.30 window before. I fumbled for the recorder and hit record. The breathing was there immediately louder than it had ever been at night. Maybe negative 15 decibels. Clearly audible through the monitor speaker without headphones. I could hear it in the room, and the voice came faster this time. Not after several minutes of breathing after maybe 30 seconds. Owen. Same flat, featureless voice. Then, after a pause, "You stayed." I didn't respond. I don't know what I would have said. I don't know what mechanism I would have spoken into. The microphones were off, but I felt with absolute certainty that whatever was producing this sound could hear me. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew it the way you know someone is looking at you before you turn around. The silence held for about 10 seconds. Then the voice said, "Stay." Then the dead air ended. The gardening program resumed mid-sentence something about soil pH and tomato cultivation. I left the building at 7:15. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched the sun come up over the self-storage facility. My hands were shaking, which annoyed me because I don't think of myself as someone whose hands shake. I went home. I slept for 2 hours. I went back that night. I need to explain something about what happened next, and I need to be careful about how I explain it because it's the part that makes the least sense, and it's the part where I'm least confident in my own account. After February 20th, I started staying past my shift every night, not just a few minutes hours. I'd arrive at 11:50, do my shift as normal, read the station ID, monitor the automation, and then when 6 a.m. came, I'd just keep sitting there, sometimes until Carl arrived at 8:30, sometimes past that, though I'd leave the booth before he saw me and slip out through the back door by the storage room. And every time I stayed past 6, the dead air would come. Not always at the same time. Sometimes 6:30, sometimes 7:15, once as late as 8:05. But it would come. The automation would drop to silence, the breathing would start, and then the voice would speak. It didn't say much. It never said much. Usually just my name, and then a short phrase. I'll list what I remember. Owen, you came back. Owen, can you hear the gap? Owen, I left something in the log. Owen, the signal carries. Owen, don't let it go to dead air. Owen, there's more of us. I should have been terrified. I know that. Reading this back, I should have been terrified from the moment I heard my name. But sitting in that booth, in the gray winter morning light, with the space heater warming my legs and the coffee going cold in my thermos, it didn't feel like terror. It felt like something else. It felt like attention. Like being noticed. I'd been invisible for a long time. Laid off, alone, doing a job in the middle of the night that nobody knew or cared about. And here was something I didn't know what that knew my name, that wanted me there, that spoke to me specifically. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that it sounds like the beginning of something very bad. Let me tell you about the logs. When the voice said, "I left something in the log," I assumed it meant the station's broadcast log, the physical logbook that sat on the desk in the front office, where whoever was on shift was supposed to note any technical issues, the time of station ID, anything unusual. I've been writing my own entries in it since January. I hadn't looked at the older entries much, they went back years, in different handwritings, documenting the tedious life of a small station. The next morning, after the voice said that, I went to the front office and started reading back through the log. Most entries were unremarkable, but I found Dennis's handwriting messy, slanted, in blue ballpoint starting from about August of the previous year. His entries were normal at first. Timestamps, automation notes, the same boilerplate I was writing. Then, starting in early October, his entries got shorter. Just timestamps and the word clear. Then, in November, they stopped being entries at all. They were just times. 2015. 2.17. 2.22. 2.14. Written in the margin, circled. The same window I had noticed. The last entry in Dennis's handwriting was from December 8th. It said, "Signal is consistent. Same voice. I don't think it's RF interference. I don't think it's coming from outside. I think it's in the carrier itself. I'm going to try talking back." There was nothing after that. 3 weeks of blank pages. Then my first entry in January. I should have called Carl. I should have asked what happened to Dennis. I should have told someone that the previous overnight guy had experienced the same thing I was experiencing, had documented it, and had then vanished from the job. These are the things a rational person would have done. Instead, on the night of February 27th, I talked back. The dead air came at its usual time, 2:18 a.m. I let the breathing establish. I heard it fill the booth, that steady, calm respiration that no longer sounded alien to me, but almost companionable, like someone sitting with me in the room. And then, before the voice could speak, I reached over to the mixing board, brought up the fader on microphone 1 and said, "I can hear you." The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever experienced. Not just the absence of sound, the absence of the potential for sound. As if the air itself had become solid. Then, Owen. And for the first time, there was something in the voice. Not an emotion exactly. More like a texture. A warmth. The way a radio sounds different when someone leans closer to the microphone. "Owen, you're live." I looked at the transmitter meter. Full power. Modulation active. Whatever I was saying into that microphone was going out through the antenna, into the night, onto 89.2 FM, across 15 miles of dark Pennsylvania. "Who am I talking to?" I said. "The carrier," the voice said. "The signal between stations. We've always been here. In the gaps." "We. The ones who stayed. I don't know what that means. I still don't know what that means." But in the moment, in that booth, at 2:20 in the morning, with the space heater humming and the frost on the tiny window behind the acoustic foam, it felt true. It felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. I asked, "Was Dennis one of you?" The voice didn't answer that. Instead it said, "Owen, your shift ended." I looked at the clock. It was 6:47 a.m. I had been talking or listening or something for 4.5 hours. I had no memory of the time passing. None. I remembered saying, "I can hear you," and then the voice saying, "The ones who stayed," and then the clock showing 6:47, the morning light gray and flat through the window, my throat dry, the microphone fader still up, the transmitter still broadcasting. I had been live on the air for 4.5 hours. Whatever had happened in that time had gone out through the antenna. Anyone tuned to 89.3 FM in a 15-mile radius would have heard it. All of it. Whatever it was. I pulled the fader down. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I felt calm, rested, even the way you feel after deep, dreamless sleep. I turned off the booth lights, walked out through the front office, locked the door, and drove home. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, it was past midnight. My shift had already started. I drove to the station and let myself in. Everything was normal. The automation was running. The booth was dark and cool. I turned on the lights, sat down, and checked the log. There was a new entry in handwriting I didn't recognize. The date was that day, February 28th. It said, "Owen, good show last night. Glad you're settling in. Signal is strong. See you on the air. D." The D was written with a little flourish, the way you sign a casual note to a friend. I stared at that entry for a long time. The handwriting was messy, slanted, in blue ballpoint. I opened the automation software and checked the schedule. Everything was normal, the standard overnight programming, preloaded, ready to go. But in the queue after the 2.00 a.m. jazz block, there was a file I hadn't seen before. It wasn't named like the others, no track title, no program name. Just a string of numbers, 0.08280live.wav. The file was 4 hours, 32 minutes, and 17 seconds long. I know what I should have done. I should have played it. I should have listened. I should have found out what I said or what was said through me during those lost hours. I didn't play it. I deleted it. Then I sat in the booth and waited for 2 a.m. The dead air came at 2:16. The breathing started immediately, louder than ever, not uncomfortable, just present, as natural as the hum of the equipment. And the voice came quickly, with that same new warmth, that closeness. And welcome back. And I brought the fader up. I need to tell you what happened in March. I need to tell you because it's the last month I remember clearly, and because after March the timeline gets unreliable. Not because anything dramatic happened, nothing dramatic ever happened. That was part of it, but because the boundaries between my shifts started dissolving. Here is what I know. By mid-March, I was spending 18 to 20 hours a day in that building. I'd arrive in the late afternoon, sit in the booth, wait for the dead air, talk, listen, lose time, and then at some point realize it was the next afternoon and I hadn't eaten or moved or used the bathroom. I was sleeping on the cot in the back room, the same cot Dennis had used. I was eating from the mini fridge, which seemed to always have food in it even though I couldn't remember buying any. Carl said something to me once. I was in the booth and he appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in, which shouldn't have been possible because the front door was loud, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not concerned. More like resigned. Like he was looking at something he'd seen before. "You're here early," he said. It was 2:00 p.m. "I came in to check the automation," I said. He nodded slowly. "Dennis used to do that too." He paused. Toward the end, I should have asked what he meant by that. Instead, I said, "Carl, who funds this station." He looked at me for a long moment. "Grants," he said. "Same as always." "From who?" "You don't need to worry about that, Owen." He left. I sat in the booth and waited for 2:00 a.m., and it occurred to me with a kind of distant clarity that I couldn't remember what day it was. The voice had changed by then. Not its quality, it was still that flat, featureless, depersonalized voice. But the things it said had changed. It no longer greeted me. It no longer asked me to stay. Instead, it said things like, "Owen, read the station ID. Owen, you're live. Owen, don't leave the signal. Owen, the gap is narrowing. Owen, we can hear you so clearly now." And I would respond. I would say the station ID. I would talk into the microphone for hours talking about nothing. Talking about everything. Talking about my life, my apartment, the data entry job, the strip mall on Route 19, the self-storage facility, the frost on the window. I don't know who was listening. I don't know if anyone was listening. But I was broadcasting. I was always broadcasting. The fader was always up. Here's the part that scares me. Not the voice. Not the dead air. Not the lost time. What scares me is that I called my landlord in early April to ask about my rent, and he said it had been paid, automatically from my account, same as always. I said, "Okay, thank you," and hung up. And then I thought, when was the last time I was at my apartment? When was the last time I left this building? I couldn't answer. I genuinely couldn't answer. I was sitting in the booth. It was 3:20 a.m. The monitor speaker was playing soft jazz, and I could not remember the last time I had been outside. Not in a panicked way. Not in a scared way. In a blank way. A static way. The way a radio has no memory of what it broadcast an hour ago. I tried to leave. I stood up, walked to the front door, put my hand on the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed it open. The parking lot was there my car, the self-storage place, Route 19, with its yellow line disappearing into the dark. Everything was normal, but I didn't want to leave. The thought of leaving felt like the thought of turning off a radio mid-sentence, like I'd be cutting something off, like the signal would stop and whoever was listening would be left in silence. And that seemed cruel. I went back to the booth. The voice said, "Owen, good. I am writing this in May. I think it's May. The calendar on the computer says May 14th, but I'm not confident the computer's date is correct because I noticed last week that it said May 14th then too. It might always say May 14th. I'm not sure it matters. Here is what I know about my situation. I am in the broadcast booth at WKRL, Harwick, Pennsylvania. The fader on microphone 1 is up. The transmitter is running at full power. The automation software shows a live broadcast in progress. It has shown a live broadcast in progress for a long time, I'm not sure how long. Weeks, maybe longer. I read the station ID at the top of every hour. I think I do. I intend to. Time is difficult. The voice is always there now. Not in the dead air doesn't happen anymore, because there is no dead air. I am always live. The voice is in the signal with me, underneath my words, alongside my words, woven into the carrier wave. Sometimes it's one voice. Sometimes it's several. They breathe when I breathe. They pause when I pause. We are synchronized in a way that feels natural, the way you synchronize your footsteps with someone walking beside you without thinking about it. I think I understand what Dennis meant. The signal carries. It carries you with it. Carl hasn't come in for a while. I'm not sure how long. The front office light doesn't turn on anymore. I tried the switch once and nothing happened. The back room is very cold. I don't go in there. The mini fridge stopped humming some time ago. But the booth is warm. The space heater works. The equipment hums. The microphone is live. The transmitter is broadcasting. My shift ended a long time ago. I'm still broadcasting. I want to stop. I need to say that clearly. I want to stop. Sometimes, usually around what I think is 2 in the morning, I have a moment of complete clarity where I understand that something is wrong, that I have been sitting in this chair for far too long, that I have not eaten or slept or left this building in a period of time I cannot quantify, that the voice is not my friend, that the signal is not a community, that what happened to Dennis happened to me, and that I should stand up and walk out and never come back. And in those moments I reach for the fader. I put my fingers on it. I start to pull it down. And the voice says, "Owen, just my name. That's all. Just my name, spoken the way you'd say someone's name to make them look up, to remind them you're there, to let them know they're not alone." And I leave the fader up. Because here's the thing I keep coming back to. Before this, nobody said my name. Nobody knew I was there. I sat in a room and processed data, and went home and slept, and came back and processed more data, and nobody ever once said, "Owen, you're here. I notice you. Stay." And now, something says it. Every hour, every minute, woven into the carrier wave, transmitted out into the dark across 15 miles of sleeping Pennsylvania. My name, my presence, my voice going out and out and out. Maybe that's how it gets you. Maybe that's all it ever is. The thing in the signal. The thing in the gap. Whatever it is, maybe it just offers you the one thing you were missing. Attention. Presence. The feeling of being received. I don't know how to end this. I'm writing it on the station's desktop computer in a text document while I'm live on the air. I don't know who will read it. I don't know if the computer is connected to the internet anymore. I don't know if this building is still where I think it is, but I know the signal is going out. I know the transmitter is running. I know that somewhere, Someone has their radio tuned to 89.3 FM and they can hear me. Maybe they're an insomniac. Maybe they're a truck driver on Route 19. Maybe they're the next overnight guy, listening from home before his first shift, not knowing what he's about to walk into. If you're listening, the job listing is still on Indeed. No experience necessary. Don't apply. Don't come to the station. Don't tune in. But if you do tune in, if you're already listening, if you've been listening this whole time, then you already know. The signal carries. It carries you with it. And my shift ended 3 hours ago, but I'm still here. I'm still broadcasting. And the voice just said my name again, and it sounded like mine.